Hello, fifth graders. Welcome to our next math lesson. Today's lesson is going to be dealing with chapter 16, lesson 1. It's talking about classifying triangles, and we are starting our lesson today on page 852. Now, when we talk about triangles today, hopefully by now you realize that the word triangle means something that has three angles. The word tri itself here means three. That's why they call it a triangle, three angles. And the number of angles also tells you the number of sides that this figure actually has. So if you have a figure that has three angles, it's also going to have three sides. Today we're going to talk about how we classify or how we name triangles based upon their angles and also based upon their sides. Okay. Now, first of all, we're going to talk about how do we classify triangles based upon their sides. The first type of triangle we have right here is this is a triangle here. Obviously it has three sides, 1, 2, 3. And all three of these sides have the exact same measurement. So for example, if I said that this was 9 inches, that means this also would be 9 inches, and that means this also be 9 inches. When you have a triangle where all three sides have the exact same measurement, we call that an equilateral triangle. So again, like you said, the definition of an equilateral triangle is a triangle where all the sides have the exact same length. And you'll notice here, they do. Each one of them is 9 inches or 9 centimeters, 9 feet, whatever label you want to give it. So an equilateral triangle is when all sides are the same length. Then you have another type of triangle where two of the sides are the same length. Let's say, for example, this is 11 inches. We're going to also say that this one also is 11 inches. But this one, you notice, is a little bit shorter than that. So maybe we'll say this is 5 inches. Okay, so there's two of them. There's an 11 inch, there's an 11 inch, and then there's also a 5 inch. When two of the sides are the same length, we call that an isosceles triangle. So an isosceles triangle is when two of the lengths are the same length, but the third one is going to be different than the other two. So we have 11, 11, and 5. So far we have equilateral triangle where all three sides are the same length, and we have an isosceles triangle where two of the three sides are the same length. The last type of triangle we're going to talk about as far as dealing with sides is where all three sides have a different measurement. So we might say like this one is 7 inches, this one is 8 inches, although 7 is really close to 8, we know that it's not the same number. So this might be 7 inches, this one might be 8 inches, and maybe this one is 12 inches. Notice here, all three sides have a completely different measurement. When that is the case, we call that triangle a scalene triangle. So scalene triangle is when all the sides are different lengths. So let me just review this real quick again. When you have a triangle where all three sides are the same length, we call it an equilateral triangle. When you have a triangle where two of the three sides are the same, but the third one's different, we call that an isosceles triangle. And when you have a triangle where all three sides are different measurements, then we call that a scalene triangle. Okay. Now, another important part of information you should know, and it talks about it in your book even, although it's very subtle if you don't notice it, is once we start talking about inside of a triangle, the inside of a triangle, there are three angles we talk about, 1, 2, 3. When you add all these numbers together, when you take this angle and you add this angle and you add this angle, so when you take all three angles and you add them together, it is going to be 180 degrees. Fifth graders, I really encourage you to kind of put that in your memory banks as best you can. That inside of a triangle, there has to be 180 degrees inside of a triangle. Okay, so as I mentioned up here, all three angles, when you add them together, need to equal 180 degrees. Okay, now, when we talk about the angles, you're saying, Mr. Johnson, I thought these names here talked about the lengths, the side lengths, and not the angles. Well, there's a little bit, there's something that is in common about how many sides are equal and how many angles are equal. So when we take a look at an equilateral triangle has three sides, and all three sides are the same measurement. If all three sides are the same measurement, that means all the angles are also going to be the same measurement as well. So if you have an equilateral triangle and all three sides are the same length, that means all three of these angles are the same length. So in order to figure that answer out, you're just going to take 180 and divide by 3. And by doing that, you're going to notice that every single angle is going to be 60 degrees. So in an equilateral triangle, there are 3 60-degree angles. All 3 angles, this angle right here, this angle right here, and this angle right here, all 3 of them are the exact same measurement. So if all the sides are the same, that means all the angles are going to be the same number as well. Okay. Now we know that in an isosceles triangle, 2 of the sides are the same measurement. Well, if 2 of the sides are the same measurement, that should also tell you that 2 of the angles are going to be the exact same measurement. If you look at this triangle here, doesn't it kind of look like this angle here and this angle here almost look like the exact same measurement? They do. This angle here doesn't look quite as big as those 2 do. So I might say something like, this one here is 75 degrees. Maybe I'll say that's 75. Apologize, my pen isn't writing the progress right now. So if that's 75 degrees, that should tell you that this one right here is also 75 degrees. Okay, this one's also going to be 75 degrees. So if I take 75 and I take 75 and I add those together, that's 150. And if I take 150 and subtract 180 from it, that tells me that this number here is going to be 30 degrees. And notice if I add all 3 of those numbers together, it equals 180 degrees. So that's going to work. When you have a scalene triangle, well, all 3 sides are the same, are different measurements, excuse me. All 3 sides are different measurements. That means all 3 angles, this angle, and this angle are going to be 3 totally different numbers as well. So there is a correlation between how many sides have the same measurement and how many angles have the same measurement. And you might need to use that later on in this book, or definitely into 6th grade and 7th grade. You're definitely going to be noticing that a lot. So I thought I'd kind of bring that up to your attention right now. I also want to talk about how you would classify triangles based upon their angles. Okay. Now we have already established that every single triangle has 3 angles. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. We see that. But you're going to notice something distinctly that that all 3 of these triangles have in common. Yes, they have 3 angles. But you're also going to notice that 2 of the 3 angles on every single one of these is an acute angle. What I mean by that is if you take a look at this angle right here, that's an acute angle, and that's an acute angle. So this triangle has 2 acute angles. Well, this one is an acute angle, and this one's an acute angle. So this has 2 acute angles. This one also is an acute angle, and this one's also an acute angle. So every single triangle that you will ever make is going to have a minimum of 2 acute angles. Now, how you name the triangle is what is the 3rd angle. And you've noticed this right here. Have you ever seen this shape right here where it kind of goes down like this? And sometimes you'll even see this little square here. This means that this angle right here is a right angle. We might have talked about that earlier this year. We're definitely going to talk about more about it next year too. This is a right angle. And since this triangle has a right angle, only one, we're going to call this a right triangle. Okay, so this is a right triangle because this 3rd angle here tells me, well, if this is a right angle, this needs to be a right triangle. Just like over here. Well, I know that 2 of them are acute, but notice that the 3rd one is also an acute angle. This one has 3 acute angles. That means then that this needs to be an acute triangle. In an acute triangle, all the angles are going to be acute angles, which means all 3 of them are going to be less than 90 degrees. Over here, you notice again, we have an acute angle here and an acute angle here, but this one looks like it kind of looks like it's a right angle, but it's like a lawn chair or like a reclining chair. It's kind of leaning back a little bit. That's because this is called an obtuse angle. This is an angle that's more than 90 degrees. And since this triangle here has an obtuse angle, we're going to call this an obtuse triangle because one of the angles is obtuse and the other 2 is acute. I want to make sure to clarify 5th graders. that every single angle has at least two acute angles. This has two, this one just happens to have three, and this one has two. So when you go to identify these triangles based upon their angles, don't just look at one and go, oh, that's an acute angle, so it must be an acute triangle. You got to really look at all three angles. You know that two of them are acute, you got to look at that third one. Well, these two are acute, I got to look at that third one. Well, the third one's acute as well. Well, these two are acute, I got to look at that third one to right. Okay? So in your assignment today, they're going to be asking you to classify triangles. And a lot of your answers today, you're going to have two different answers, fifth graders. You're going to have to name the triangle based upon its sides and also name it based upon its angles. So you're either going to have to write equilateral, isosceles, or scalene as one of your answers. And then you're also going to have to write right, acute, obtuse for your other answer. So be careful, fifth graders. There's going to be 2 points for a lot of these problems today. Let's do a couple of examples together here. It says classify these triangles based upon their sides and their angles. Again, we're going to do their sides and their angles. So we need two answers here. Well, let's come over here. Let's first look at the sides, and you should notice that this has all three sides being the same measurement. And if you remember back on the previous screen, what do we call a triangle where three sides are the exact same measurement? That's called the equilateral triangle. So I'm going to put down, this is an E for equilateral triangle. You would want to spell equilateral. So I know that this is an equilateral triangle based upon its sides. Now I want to look at its angles. And this is an acute angle, this is an acute angle, and this is an acute angle. If I have three acute angles, then we would call this also an acute triangle. So this would be, the answer here would be an equilateral triangle and an acute triangle. Got to have two different answers. Let's come over here. Again, let's base this one based upon its sides. So as I look at the sides, I notice that two of them are 7s, and the third one is 9.9. Well, if two of them are the same answer, if two of the sides are the same, we would call that an isosceles triangle. So I'm going to label this with an I. Okay, so I know this is an isosceles triangle. Now I want to look at the angles. Well, if I look at this angle, this looks like an acute angle. This looks like an acute angle. But this one here, this one looks like a right angle. And since one of them is a right angle, I would call this also a right triangle. So this is an isosceles right triangle. Let's come on over here. Again, two of the sides are the same length, but the third one is a different number. So if two of them are the same, I call that an isosceles triangle. And now let's look at the measurement of the angles. Well, 75, that's an acute angle. That's an acute angle. That's an acute angle. That means this is an isosceles acute triangle. Okay? Coming down over here. Noticing over here, again, I've got two, the sides have 9.2, but the third one is 15.1. So since two of the sides are the same measurement, I'm going to say that this is an isosceles triangle. Okay, but then if I look at the angles, you say, Mr. Johnson, there's no angle number here or here. That's true, but if I look over here, this angle measurement's 110, and I know that's an obtuse angle. And if one of them is an obtuse angle, that means that this triangle is also going to be an obtuse triangle as well. So this is an isosceles obtuse. Okay, noticing we've got a lot of isosceles triangles on our examples here, because this is another isosceles, isn't it? We've got 12 centimeters, 6.5. So this is an isosceles triangle. But, well, wait a minute, Johnson, there's no numbers here. But if you look very closely, all three of those do look like they're smaller than those L's over here. Remember this L here? Those look like they're all smaller, which I would agree they are. So I would say that this is an isosceles acute. Let's go over to this last one. This one's 9 yards, this one's 12 yards, this is 15. Now this happens to be one where all three of them are their different numbers. And since they're all three different numbers, we'd say that's in a scalene triangle, S for scalene. And if I look at the angles, that looks like that's acute, but that little sign right there, that means that's a right angle. So that means this would be a scalene right triangle. So be careful today, fifth graders. A lot of your answers are going to be asking for two answers. Name it based upon its sides and also based upon its angles. Now, if I remember in your book, I think there are definitions of all six of those to help you remember, but you can always come back and look at this video to help you as well. All right, so let's talk about that assignment that you have for today. You are going to be asked to do pages 855 and 856. And I'm going to have you do numbers 1 through 15 in your assignment. Remember, be careful. Some of them have two answers on them, so please be very careful with those. As always, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me. I'm here to help you the best that I can. If you need to watch the video again to help clarify a couple things, please do so. There's information in your book. So I wish you good luck on your assignment today, fifth graders. Have questions, let me know. If not, we'll see you with the next video.